It's that time of year once again where I take a look back at the games of the last 12 months and list out the 10 that I thought were best. As always, there are some disclaimers to be made. Obviously I can't play every game, so you won't be seeing Call of Duty Modern Warfare or Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 on this list. Also, as per usual, full price games with shady monetization practices, whether they launched with them or they were added later, won't be getting the nod today. That means no Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled or Mortal Kombat 11, even though they are otherwise fantastic video games. Lastly, all of this is subjective, so if you don't see a game here that you think should be mentioned, please tell me in the comments below, but keep it civil. Now, before we get into it properly, I am doing something a little bit differently this time. Every couple of entries, we're going to talk about some games that absolutely killed it in certain aspects, but didn't quite crack the top 10. Call them honourable mentions, call them special awards or categories, call them whatever you like. It just gives me a chance to talk about more games that were great this year, of which there were many. So without further ado, let's talk about one of those games right now. 2019's best surprise, Apex Legends. These days, I feel like the industry's biggest titles take so much time to build hype and anticipation, so for something as fun and polished as Apex Legends to release without anyone marketing the hell out of it before it dropped is mind-blowing. Now, I'm no Battle Royale fan, and after a couple of months I actually dropped off the Apex Legends bandwagon, but there's no denying that it's a ripper of a game. It gives players the quick and tight gunplay that Respawn are known for, and while it isn't quite as fast as Titanfall 2, it does still bring a great sense of mobility to the table. On top of all that, it gives us a cast of interesting characters who bring their own unique flavour to the Battle Royale game mode, and all of this seemingly came out of nowhere. Even more surprising is the game's ping system, which made teaming with internet randos a bearable experience by letting me communicate with teammates without ever having to turn on a microphone. I even managed to win a couple of games. Talk about surprises.
They kill you, they're better. You kill them, you're better.
Number 10. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Back in 2013, EA managed to get their hands on the exclusive rights to develop Star Wars video games, and for 6 years, Star Wars video games have been a wasteland of shady monetization and a lack of interesting stories. Then along comes Respawn Entertainment with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which, if I'm being honest, is easily the best Star Wars game I've ever played. Where previous EA attempts set in a galaxy far, far away were multiplayer focused and more concerned with wringing money out of their players, Fallen Order delivered a completely single-player experience with a story that fleshed out the Star Wars canon while featuring a cast of well-rounded and interesting characters. Hell, if I didn't care about potentially spoiling things by having a Best Moment award, Jedi Fallen Order's climax would win it hands down. But this game isn't just a delivery system for a neat Star Wars story. Jedi Fallen Order also has some really fantastic gameplay to boot. It's easy to point at games like Dark Souls and the Tomb Raider reboots and say that Fallen Order liberally borrows mechanics from them, and it does, but it does so really well. Lightsaber combat has never felt as good as it does here, where the focus is on well-timed parries and smart use of your force abilities, and the game proves that you can provide a Souls-like experience while still allowing players to pick their own level of difficulty. Outside of combat, the game's environments are massive and detailed, and benefit from not only the Dark Souls approach to looping level design, but also the responsive platforming and satisfying Metroidvania approach to exploration that was present in the Tomb Raider reboots. I suppose the thing that ties these disparate gameplay elements together is the game's use of force powers and how it ties them to combat and exploration in a really satisfying way. All of this is wrapped in a truly authentic Star Wars style, from its enemy and vehicle designs to its music and sound effects. Even the wipes from scene to scene scream Star Wars. It is a shame then that the game has some really rough edges in some spots, with an inconsistent frame rate, the occasional loading wall, and some pretty noticeable texture pop in. With that said, I think it's a testament to the game's quality that it's still a Game of the Year contender despite its shortcomings.
I recognize that stance. Perhaps you've had some training after all. Who was your master? Padawan? Someone I killed, perhaps?
Number 9. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. On paper, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night looks like a love letter to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and it totally is, unapologetically. It rocks a similar gothic style and features a story that, like its spiritual predecessor, revolves around the appearance of a mysterious evil castle full of monsters, but the sheer joy behind Bloodstained is so infectious, it's hard to play the game without a huge smile on your face. From its ridiculous enemies like the balloon pigs and the uncomfortably realistic cat and dog demons to its huge variety of locations that are just bursting with secrets to find, playing Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is a great time from start to finish, with a crazy amount of weapons and abilities to experiment with, as well as surprisingly extensive crafting and cooking systems which are both useful and silly as hell. I can't stress just how big this game really is. There are hundreds of enemy types, weapons with entirely different movesets including unique motion-based special moves, and demonic shards to equip that give you crazy upgradable abilities based on certain monsters. I haven't even seen half of these shards in action, there are so many of them, and they cover things like familiar companions which aid you in battle or more active attack style abilities. And then there's the traversal abilities that range from the simple, like your standard double jump skill, to the insane, like being able to flip the environment 180 degrees to walk on the roof. Using these to explore the game's massive map scratches that Metroidvania itch more thoroughly than any game of this style in recent years. Then on top of all this, the game is just stylish as hell. The heavy cel-shaded graphics combine with Ritual of the Night's gothic visuals to create something really striking, and its musical mix of orchestral arrangements and hard rock flourishes is pitch perfect. It's exactly what I would want from a game that is essentially Symphony of the Night cranked up to 11. The same goes for the voice work, which is cheesy and dramatic and entertaining all at the same time. Is Bloodstained better than Symphony of the Night? I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I will say that it beats the hell out of any Castlevania game since then.
Me? I'm your executioner.
2019's best style, Ape Out. Whether we're talking about its in-game visuals that feature a vibrant minimalist approach or its menus that pay homage to the graphic designs of Saul Bass film posters from the 50s and 60s, Ape Out is bursting with personality and flair. As you direct the titular ape through each level, they evolve from these nice clean canvases into colourful splattered works of art, and it's all accompanied by this dynamic jazz percussion soundtrack where actions like running and attacking enemies are reflected by frantic drumming and the crashing of snares. It all combines to make this really cohesive and striking overall style, which, for me at least, made up for the game being mechanically shallow and rather short as a whole. But boy does it make an impression. Even the death screens that zoom out whenever you die to show your path through the angular maze-like levels is really awesome. Like I said, the game comes up short in a few areas, but it delivers on style in spades, and is pretty much worth checking out for that alone. Number 8. Devil May Cry 5. If I were to sum up Devil May Cry 5 in a sentence, I would call it the coolest and goofiest game to release this year. This is a game where one character has a variety of robot arms that can trigger special moves, one character fights using a motorcycle among other things, and one character sends out demonic animals to fight while he hangs back, and somehow it all works. Capcom have been struggling with what to do with this franchise for the past decade, but with Devil May Cry 5 they've nailed their return to the character action subgenre better than anyone could have predicted. From start to finish, DMC5 provides a pulse-pounding adrenaline rush, but I was most caught off guard by how much variety it had to offer on top of its polished fundamentals. Games that let you play as multiple characters that control so distinctly are pretty rare, but this game knocks it out of the park by giving players slick core combat controls that persist between characters, as well as a handful of unique elements to throw into the mix depending on who you're playing as. It could be so easy to become overwhelmed by the myriad of techniques on offer, but Capcom have done a fantastic job of giving you just enough crazy tools to work with when you first go hands-on with each character, allowing you to experiment without confusing yourself and letting you whet your appetite for more goodies down the line. Even the most unique playable character of the lot, the edgelord newcomer V, feels like second nature to control once you wrap your head around his particularly divergent playstyle. Now, even though V, Nero, and Dante are great fun to kick ass with, the game isn't just its great combat. Devil May Cry 5 also looks incredible, environments in the latter half of the game notwithstanding. Character animations are smooth and impactful, while models themselves are surprisingly detailed, and the flourishes that accompany so many of your basic attacks just add to the satisfaction that DMC5's combat already delivers in spades. And its audio. Man, this game's audio. Landing attacks feels suitably meaty, the game's voice work is dramatic and goofy in the best way possible, and the game's soundtrack is certainly one of the best this year. In particular, the way that each character's signature track adds more and more layers as you increase your style meter is just magical. As a pure action game, DMC5 is almost unmatched. Number 7. Astral Chain. If you know me, you know I love a great character action game, and so I was spoiled this year with both DMC5 and the latest from Platinum Games, Astral Chain. With that said though, I would be lying if I said that Astral Chain was simply another Platinum game. It definitely delivers on the fast-paced, flashy action that they're known for, but Astral Chain supplements this with a truly unique gimmick in the form of its legions. For all intents and purposes, these legions are enslaved monsters that aid you in battle, switching between taking care of enemies on their own and tag teaming targets when you deem it necessary. Not only do you make use of these powerful entities to finish off hard-hitting combos, they also have a handful of other functions. Certain legions let you control them more directly to shoot projectiles, manually slice objects, or punch your enemies while wearing the legion as a suit, while the chain that binds you to your legion actually allows you to momentarily imprison enemies. Now that's not to say that the legion mechanics are perfect, they're a little awkward at the outset, and the fundamentals of the subgenre do feel a little less graceful to account for them, but actually learning how to use the legions in tandem with the tried and true platinum combat is just so satisfying once it all clicks. Before you know it, you're clotheslining charging enemies with your legion's chain and finishing every combo with a hard-hitting tandem attack, and it all just feels so rewarding. Beyond the combat, there's plenty of things that Astral Chain also does really well. It's got a surprisingly fleshed out world, and while the game's narrative is a bit predictable, its likable characters keep it interesting until the credits roll. And then there's the non-combat gameplay. Stuff like sliding block puzzles and balancing minigames that aren't all that great on their own, but do deliver a rather enjoyable breather from the intense anime action. And on that note, Astral Chain really does feel like an anime in video game form, what with its stunning cel-shaded art style, the colourful effects that punctuate its lightning-fast combat, and its energetic and catchy soundtrack. Also, it straight up features an actual anime-style intro complete with upbeat rock theme. While I wouldn't necessarily call Astral Chain the best pure action game of the year, it definitely brought something completely new to the table, and that really impressed me.
ID code confirmed.
2019's best soundtrack, Cadence of Hyrule. Longtime viewers of this channel will know that I'm not really much of a Zelda fan, but even I know that the series has some of the best music in the medium. With that said, Cadence of Hyrule, the Zelda-themed Crypt of the Necrodancer spin-off, easily has some of my favourite Zelda music of all time. From its bouncing rendition of the series' overworld theme to its brass and electric guitar-heavy version of Gerudo Valley, Cadence of Hyrule is an audio dream come true. And it's not just that singular tracks are really good either, it's that each track has a handful of variations that kick in whether you're in or out of combat, or if you're near the game's singing shopkeeper. It's just so dynamic. And then there's the boss themes that primarily use the instruments that the bosses themselves are themed after. Cadence of Hyrule is a fantastic game for a number of reasons, but its soundtrack is easily its best feature, and composer Danny Baranowski should be incredibly proud of his work. Number 6. Resident Evil 2. I was conflicted about putting this year's Resident Evil 2 remake so high on this list since, well, it's a remake, but it's also about as ground up as remakes get, so why not? Whenever a classic game like RE2 is remade, there's always the fear that something will get lost in the update, but Resident Evil 2 manages to maintain the creepy tension that made the original so memorable despite making some really sweeping changes. For starters, the core gameplay is completely different. Long gone are the days where tank controls ruled. Now Claire and Leon are able to move and aim and shoot at the same time with the camera situated nice and comfortably behind their shoulders. While I would have been personally fine with a return to tank controls, the new control scheme feels accurate enough to make the shooting feel good, but not so accurate that headshots are a given. Pairing this gunplay with zombies that sway unpredictably as they approach you and can take at least one shot to the head without dying outright, and the game still manages to stay tense without relying on the eeriness of 1998's fixed camera angles. That's not to say that the tension isn't diminished slightly, but what it loses from having more responsive controls, it more than makes back in terms of the game's quality presentation. Resident Evil 2 is upsettingly detailed, especially when it comes to showing gore, and its chilling sound design is second to none. Without these masterful elements, I'm not sure that the gameplay on its own would have had the desired effect, but with them, RE2 sure is a spooky time. And that's really only half of the gameplay. The other half involves lock and key puzzles that feel lifted right from the 1998 classic, but with the updated movement controls and the lack of load times between rooms, it's a much smoother experience overall, even though much of the game still involves smartly managing your inventory and trekking back and forth between item boxes. And let's not forget a certain special someone whose pursuit of you is that much more terrifying than in the original because he actually follows you now instead of just showing up randomly. Mr. X scared the absolute hell out of me during my first of many playthroughs. With that all in mind, I think RE2 might just be the best video game remake ever made, combining modern visuals, audio, and gameplay updates with the original's classic game design.
Stop moving.
Officer, you need help?
Stay back, sir. I got this.
Number 5. Luigi's Mansion 3. To call Luigi's Mansion 3 the best game on the Nintendo Switch is sure to upset somebody, but I truly believe that to be the case. The franchise has always been one that, in my eyes at least, has always scratched up against greatness but has never quite made it. But Luigi's Mansion 3 is an enjoyable experience from top to bottom thanks to a number of factors. For starters, the game is much more substantial and far more environmentally varied than either of its predecessors, providing players with 17 spooktacular floors of haunted hijinks in the Last Resort Hotel. Now, you might hear that and say to yourself, how can a hotel be environmentally varied? And to that I say, shut up. Nintendo clearly has no idea what hotels look like, so you're gonna get full-on Egyptian tombs, haunted shopping malls, and massive spooky greenhouses to explore. And scouring each of these floors is satisfying, not only in the sense that vacuuming up everything that isn't nailed down is satisfying, but also in the sense that it has some really clever puzzles to solve. Beyond the location itself, Luigi's Mansion 3 is as fun to play as ever, with its tried and true stun and capture gameplay back, and for my money at least, easier to control than in previous games. On top of its refined legacy mechanics, Luigi's Mansion also introduces a slam attack that lets you wear down captured ghosts faster, as well as letting you interact with items that you've used your brand new suction cup on, letting you smash inanimate objects that might be blocking your path. And then there's Gooigi, the slime clone of Green Mario who can do practically everything that Luigi can do, except touch water. Swapping between the two to tackle tandem tasks is easy enough and adds plenty of depth, but beyond that, it allows for a co-op partner to join in with minimal fuss, and that's awesome. In addition to all of this, Luigi's Mansion 3 is just jam-packed with pure charm. From its spooky tunes to its detailed environments, there's a lot to love about Luigi's Mansion 3, but the show is stolen by our hero and his absolutely insane level of animation. Honestly, I have never seen a Nintendo character given so much personality in a single game, and Luigi's Mansion 3 cements the green-clad plumber's place as the far more interesting of the two Mario brothers.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
2019's best game mechanic, Outer Wilds. Now, Outer Wilds didn't quite get its narrative hooks into me as much as it did for a lot of other folks, but I can totally appreciate its killer core mechanic, the time loop. Traveling from planet to planet and unraveling mysteries would be cool on its own, but having a 22-minute time limit before the sun goes supernova and kills you forces you to pick and choose which threads you chase down. Having everything running on a looping schedule also means that the game can have its world change over the course of the loop, and means that players have to predict when and where they'll need to be to take advantage of these changes. Having bits of information serve as the key to progress rather than items or abilities is also a great idea that I wish I'd seen more regularly, and it works perfectly in Outer Worlds' Clockwork Galaxy. Number 4. Katana Zero. Look, I know I have a type when it comes to indie games, okay? Hotline Miami, Ronin, Fury, give me an indie action game with gratuitous violence, pretty neon colors, and a pumping synth soundtrack, and I'm yours. But I dare say that Katana Zero might have topped all of these games for me. I love its visual style, which features retro video effects and sprite art that just oozes personality, on top of its seedy environments and neon flashes during the action. These visuals, coupled with Katana Zero's infectiously groovy soundtrack, were enough to convince me to buy the game, but I was not ready for just how fun it wound up being. There's this great sense of kineticism to your character's movements, and it uses a perfect amount of hit stop and screen shake to make your attacks feel so rewarding to simply land. And as you progress further and further, the game becomes less about split-second reactions, though they are still important, and more about planning your route through the opposition, like a big, bloody, neon-soaked puzzle. Then there's the smaller touches, like your ability to dodge roll through practically anything, to reflect bullets with a well-timed sword swing, and to pick up loose objects on the fly to toss at your enemies. And let's not forget the handy bullet time feature, which is great for pulling off any of the previously mentioned tricks in the middle of all this murdery chaos. Once you get into a groove and your reflexes are firing on overdrive, the game becomes poetry in motion. Weirdly, the things that stick with me most are the handful of neat story elements Katana Zero has stored up its sleeve. Now, I'm not saying that it has the most cohesive, well-written narrative around, but it does have a few really cool moments that make great use of the hero's precognitive abilities. I'd say that Katana Zero is worth checking out on the quality of its gameplay alone, but it would be silly to ignore its handful of genuinely surprising story beats. But also, yeah, buy it for the gameplay. You will not regret it. Number 3. Control. Control opens with its main character, Jesse Faden, telling us that this is going to be weirder than usual, but nothing could have prepared me for just how off the rails the latest game from Remedy was about to go. Take its setting for example. The Federal Bureau of Control, situated in the supernatural oldest house, is a government department that deals in the paranatural, or rather in the control of information regarding the paranatural. What this means, in the simplest terms, is that the oldest house is filled with a bunch of cool stuff, and you're bound to interact with some of it and read about the rest of it, and this aspect of Control is easily its best. Reading a heavily redacted report warning of the traffic light and not knowing what that really means until you're actually facing down with a literal, potentially sentient traffic light is just an example of why I absolutely adore this game. But it's not all just weird objects and well-written collectible notes. The story of Jesse Faden, how she's come to find herself within the shifting walls of the oldest house, and why the staff are calling her the new director are also really fascinating, and while I'm not sure it completely sticks the landing, I am dying to see more of this particular setting. A lot of that is because of the sheer weirdness factor, sure, but Jessie is also a character that I really enjoyed spending time with, thanks in no small part to her frequently sarcastic inner monologue. Now, for as crazy as things get in the story, it wouldn't be half as enjoyable without Control's surprisingly impactful and fun combat. Blasting possessed bureau workers with the mystical shape-shifting service weapon is a surprisingly fun time on its own, and the game piles on a bunch of superpowers to complement the shockingly good gunplay. Before you know it, you'll be alternating between shooting a gun and telekinetically tossing debris at your enemies while you fly around a room. Actually, that reminds me, Control does this really fantastic thing where you'll actually use sections of wall or floor to throw at your enemies if there aren't any loose items around. It doesn't make much of a difference in terms of gameplay, but it does look really cool, which is something else Control does really well. Seriously, its combination of brutalist architecture that makes certain areas look like they were ripped from an office in the 60s is mashed with these shifting walls and a regular dash of impossible space that makes for a really memorable environment. Its overall presentation is so strong that the game's occasional technical hiccups feel trivial in hindsight. Control is definitely the strangest game of the year, but the most surprising part of it was that it had the audio, visuals, and gameplay to back it all up.
So, welcome. Assuming you have the necessary clearance, and do follow the safety protocols. Read the manual. Otherwise, bad things will happen.
2019's shot of pure joy. Untitled Goose Game. Okay, I can't think of a single game I played this year that had me grinning from ear to ear and chuckling like a drunk idiot for its entire duration, quite like Untitled Goose Game. I wasn't really expecting much out of the mischievous sandbox game, but with its simple yet effective art style and the charmingly ineffective animations of the villagers you're harassing, it's hard not to smile as you wreak feathery havoc upon this small countryside town. Add to that its delightful dynamic soundtrack and you're in for a good time. Is it much more than a good time? No. Does Untitled Goose Game offer enough for you to play it more than once? Probably not. But is Untitled Goose Game guaranteed to put a smile on your face? If you're anything like me, then yeah, 100%. Number 2. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. From Software have to be one of the most acclaimed studios of the last 10 years, and for good reason. I mean, the sheer quality of their output actually spawned an entire subgenre of action RPGs. With that in mind, I think that might be why Sekiro left such an impression on me, because it's so different to what you might expect from the makers of Dark Souls. I mean, sure, Sekiro features a similar level of difficulty and punishment, and it uses the same bonfire approach to checkpoints as From's previous games, but to call this game a Souls-like just feels wrong. For starters, its combat has been completely overhauled. Where Dark Souls and even Bloodborne would require you to keep your health and stamina in check while dodging or blocking enemy attacks, Sekiro is more concerned with posture. While you still have a health bar, you and your enemies also use this new posture meter as well, and it indicates how balanced you are. If your posture is low, you're able to block practically everything, while if your posture is high, a single attack might put you off balance and open you up to a brutal attack. This goes for enemies as well, and although it is possible to whittle down enemy health bars by simply attacking, it's much more efficient and fun to cause them to lose balance before hitting them with a lethal blow. This system features so much depth, allowing you to put enemies off balance by attacking them relentlessly while they block to slowly build up posture damage, or allowing you to break their posture instantly by successfully parrying an attack at the last second. This, alongside special enemy attacks that must be countered in very specific ways, makes Sekiro's swordplay feel as deadly as it should, but it also forces players to adapt to the game's intended style of play. There are no shields for you to hide behind, and you can't bring friends in to help you like you could in Dark Souls, and this rigidity can be a bit of a deal breaker for some folks. Personally, I have a great respect for a game that's so uncompromising. I mean, without it, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice would just be another Souls-like, and there's a risk it would be lost in the crowd. That's not to say that Sekiro's combat is the only thing that sets it apart from its dark fantasy cousins, it's just the most notable. The game's surprisingly mobile platforming mechanics and supremely enjoyable stealth elements also play a role in setting Sekiro apart, for sure, and its story is easily the most straightforward thing From have released in the last 10 years. But if you love the feeling of accomplishment that comes from beating a tough Dark Souls boss, I dare say Sekiro is able to top that, thanks to its unyielding design. Number 1. The Outer Worlds. The Outer Worlds is the spiritual successor to one of my favorite games of all time, Fallout New Vegas, and it simply does everything that game did, but better. It's got the weird and wonderful characters, the opposing factions, and the bizarre setting, but it also has something that New Vegas didn't. The Outer Worlds has polish. I still love New Vegas, for sure, but having an RPG of this style that isn't crashing on every other load screen, or having quest critical items disappear from the world map, or even having every single interactable in the room float an inch above the ground for no discernible reason is just really refreshing. Not only that, but the Outer Worlds also manages to be a pretty decent action game. Now, I'm not saying it's the next coming of Doom or Titanfall 2, but it's a damn sight better than the Fallout games have ever been in the past, that's for sure. Playing the game and relying on your own FPS skills is actually totally feasible, even without abusing its time dilation mechanic, which was a pleasant surprise. While decent combat mechanics are nice, and it's great to see one of these games that isn't broken 6 ways to Sunday, what I really came to the Outer Worlds for was Obsidian's clever writing and robust RPG systems, and the game certainly doesn't disappoint. The Outer Worlds setting, the Halcyon Colony, is odd to say the least, as interstellar megacorporations basically rule this tiny slice of the galaxy with an iron fist. But for as grim as it sounds on the surface, the Outer Worlds is genuinely hilarious, as Obsidian pushes the game's late-stage capitalist nightmare to its absurd limits. The game also gives you a wide variety of characters to interact with, not the least of which are the companions who can join you on your space adventures. This band of outcasts is definitely a highlight of the game, as they're also well written and entertaining to interact with. Interacting with the world is a joy as well, as the game gives you a really broad approach to building your character in the early stages. Letting you spend points on umbrella skills until they reach level 50 is a novel way of handling specific traits, and lets you dabble in a much wider variety of areas before focusing on where you want your character to ultimately end up. For example, I was building a muscle-bound idiot who was good at intimidating folks, but the early game let me dip my toes into persuasion or deception too, which was nice. The fact that the Outer Worlds let me make an actual idiot, and had that choice reflected in a decent amount of dialogue options, made for a good early impression, but the hours and hours of questing, hanging out with my lovable crew of misfits, and sinking my teeth into the game's humorously dark setting truly cemented the Outer Worlds as my game of the year for 2019.
Ah, you've landed good. Hawthorne should be close by. What in law's name? Is that him? Oh, that idiot.
And with that, we wave goodbye to 2019 and look forward to the future. It's kind of crazy to me that next year we might be seeing next-gen launch titles on this list, when it really feels like the current gen has only just found its stride. Still, we have plenty to look forward to in 2020. There's a new Animal Crossing on the way, the Yakuza series is taking a left turn into turn-based RPG town, and I know I'm personally excited for Ghost of Tsushima and The Last of Us Part 2. But what are you folks at home looking forward to in 2020? And what were your games of the year for 2019? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, kakite, Happy New Year, bye bye.